Hello and welcome to Birth as We Know It. I am your podcast host, Kiona Nessenbaum. I have experienced birth as a doula, a student midwife, and as a mother of 3 amazing children with my husband and high school sweetheart by my side. After attending over 130 births, including my own, I've realized that each birth experience is truly unique. So make sure you subscribe and join me every week as we are guided through many different birth experiences through the lens of the storyteller. Please be aware that some of the stories can be triggering to hear, so feel free to pause, take a breath, and come back and listen whenever you're ready. With that said, let's prep ourselves to dive deep and get detailed about what really happens in the birth space. As a reminder, this podcast is intended for educational purposes only and has no intention of giving or replacing any medical advice. All advice that is given on the podcast is from the personal experiences of the storytellers. All medical or health-related questions should be directed to your licensed provider. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Birth as We Know It podcast. I'm super excited to be interviewing Anissa Gusti, and she is going to be talking about 2 of her birth experiences today. Welcome, Anissa.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. So we will go ahead and dive right in and having you just tell us a little bit about yourself and who's in your family.
So I am married to my best friend, John. I have known my husband for 20 years. We actually met when we were 12 in middle school.
That's awesome.
I grew up in Tukwila, which is like a small, suburb outside of Seattle. And it's such a small knit community. There's only one middle school and one high school. So basically, the kids that you go to middle school with, you grow up with. We weren't necessarily super close until high school, junior and senior year. And then once we graduated, we were inseparable. So there's John, and I have a 4-year-old daughter, Evelyn, and then a 2.5-month-old Jack. Yeah.
That's awesome. That is super awesome. So before we dive into your personal pregnancies and your birth experiences, have you ever attended any births prior to your own?
Nope.
Nope. So they were just your first experiences, and that was your introduction to labor, pregnancy, and birth?
Yes. My first introduction actually to birth was my own birth. My mom had videotaped it, and it was
awesome.
It was something that when we were kids, we would watch my birth video, that's kind of weird, thinking about, but my mom was so open with her body and just kind of this is what it was. This is what birth is. So yeah, my own birth was my first introduction. And I think I was maybe 7 or 8 the first time I saw my own birth.
I think that's awesome. I give kudos to your mom for that, because I feel like more people should do that just to kind of normalize birth and know hey, this is how you came into the world. So be happy that you're here, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. So when you got pregnant with Evelyn, were you and John trying, or was it a surprise, or were you just awesome, let's do this?
It was definitely a surprise. We had just gotten married, I think 2 months prior to finding out we were pregnant with her. And when I found out I was pregnant, I was like, oh shit. I was 25 and I had just started my own business. Actually, at 25, I had started my own business. I was 27 when I got pregnant with Evelyn. And my business was thriving. I was financially successful for the first time in my life. I come from a family that is, lots of property. And so it was a point in my life where everything was stable. And then all of a sudden, once everything's good, it's bam, you're pregnant. So it was definitely a surprise.
Yeah, that sounds relatable. I get that. Yeah, that's awesome that you started your own business at 25. What was your business about?
Aesthetics. I graduated with my certificate, I guess, when I was 19. And so I've been practicing for about 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
I was working for somebody, and in aesthetics, it's the only way you make money is if you work for yourself. And so I had this awesome opportunity to kind of branch into my own business where I had created my clientele. So yeah, it was awesome.
That is so cool. That's awesome. Well, good for you. That's really great. Um, and then, so how was finding out you were pregnant once it happened? You said like you were like, oh shit, like this is out of nowhere.
Yeah, yeah. It was, it was really stressful. My husband was in school at the time. He's a carpenter. So he was um, doing an apprenticeship and kind of just, not really making money. And so I was the
Mhm.
breadwinner. And when we found out we were pregnant, I was like, holy shit, my job is so physical. I did a lot of Brazilians with sugar.
Mhm.
I did a lot of eyelash extensions. So there was a part of me that was like, I think intuitively, I knew that it was going to be really hard. Um,
Mhm.
so yeah, I remember when I told John that I was pregnant, I could feel his energy. Like it was like there was a part of him that was excited, but there was a huge part of him that was like, fuck, excuse my language, but
Mhm.
like, I don't know how we're going to do this. So yeah.
Yeah. And then, so after you guys found out and everything, what was the determining factor for you guys to decide, okay, this is happening? What are the things we have to change to make it happen?
So earlier in our relationship, I believe John and I, how old was I? We were 22 when we started dating.
Mm-hmm.
And at 23, we had gotten pregnant. And at that time, I really wanted to have the baby. I was like, I am all for this. This isn't ideal. I was working 3 jobs, trying to build
Mm-hmm.
my clientele. And, I asked him, I said, what do you want? And he was like, I'm definitely not ready. This isn't the right time. And I couldn't bring a kid into the world knowing that the person that made the baby with me wasn't 100% on board. And
Right.
so I had decided to get an abortion.
Mm-hmm.
And that was like traumatic in itself. I remember going into the clinic and um, they separated me from John. Like they wanted to make sure that it was my choice. They did some counseling. I did an ultrasound, and I remember it was the first time I'd ever been pregnant. And during the ultrasound, she had the screen off, and I was like, well, can I see, I want to see what's going on. I want to see this baby. And she was like, that's kind of weird.
Mm-hmm.
But for whatever reason, I just wanted to see, it was a part
Right.
of me. And, we go through and they basically knocked me out. And I remember there was a nurse in the room with me as I was like waking up. I don't remember any of the DNC. I had a DNC, and she was holding my hand and I was crying, and she's like, are you okay? And I was like, no, I'm not okay. This, I just wish this happened at a different time. This is not what I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
And I had asked her to like print a picture of the ultrasound just because I wanted to have something from that baby. Um, and so it was a traumatic event for both of us. I remember when I got out and I was in like kind of the recovery room. John was in there with me, and he had looked at me and he's like, I'm so sorry. Like, we shouldn't have fucking done this. We should have thought, like, waited a little bit longer. And he's like, I know you're not okay. And, it was just this kind of profound moment in our relationship where it was like, holy shit, we just did something. And now looking back at it, I feel like it was the right decision just because of where we were at financially and not only finances, but like mentally.
Mm-hmm.
We both come from such unhealthy family backgrounds that it was really important to me to do a lot of therapy. We did some couples therapy, and really start to heal and unpack our own stuff before we brought babies into this world.
Yeah.
Um, and so before we decided to have a live birth,
Mm-hmm.
we did a lot of healing, and we're still doing healing. We're still in therapy and
Mm-hmm.
um, doing all of that fun stuff. But having that abortion really, I told myself, and John and I had both agreed that if we get pregnant again, like we're not going through that again. We will have the baby regardless of the finances. We will make it work. We will get into therapy if we need it, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what we did.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. Like, and when I say awesome, I'm not saying like, oh, it's so awesome you got an abortion, because obviously that's a really, really, really hard decision to make. The part that I think is awesome from that story is the communication that you and John had together, and actually coming together, making that decision together, realizing like, man, this is really hard together, and then staying together through that, because not everybody can do that. Not everybody can stay together. There's a lot of blame. There's a lot of finger pointing. There's a lot of why did you make me do this kind of thing surrounding a lot of abortions. But from the sounds of it, it made yours and John's relationship stronger because you guys stayed in it together. So
Yes.
that's the part that I think is awesome.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, like that's also a really, really brave thing for you to do as well, because it's challenging and it's hard, and there's so much behind that decision. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of bravery there. So I'm happy that you guys did what you felt like you needed to do. And then now you are where you are today with two beautiful children. And we're going to dive into what that's like now.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So for Evelyn, when you decided, hey, okay, we're doing this, was there anything throughout your pregnancy that caused any struggles? Like, were there any health issues, any special cravings that you had, or anything like that?
Yeah. Yeah. And I cuss a lot, so I apologize.
That's
But
fine. No worries.
both of my pregnancies were completely fucked. My first trimester with Evelyn, I had extreme morning sickness,
Mm,
and extreme morning sickness while doing a ton of resilience is the two just don't mix. Your
right.
senses are completely heightened. I'm like in people's vulvas and in their buttholes, and
Mm-hmm.
it made it really hard to do my job. I remember mid-service one time I actually vomited, and I wasn't trying to tell anybody that I was pregnant. And I had most of my clients for like over 5 years. And so I finally was like, I'm so sorry, it's not you. I'm pregnant. And I had decided then that I needed to kind of like maybe work part-time and
Mm-hmm.
cut my schedule back. So I ended up announcing my pregnancy a lot earlier than I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so yeah, actually, there's something that I want to go back to before Evelyn.
Yeah, go for it.
Um, I we did get pregnant after the abortion, and we were like, not the ideal timing. And I was on board to keep the baby. I was super excited, and I wasn't as sick as I was with my first pregnancy, because I was really sick with the pregnancy where I had the abortion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and intuitively, I felt like maybe something wasn't right. But I ended up having a miscarriage with
Mm,
that pregnancy at 11 and a half weeks.
mm,
And it was, I just felt like this crazy cramping all night. And John works in construction, so he's up and out of the door by like 4 a.m. And around 5 a.m., I was like, okay, something's not right. And I started bleeding.
mm,
And I had called John and I said, hey, I think I'm losing the baby. I need you to get home. I had called my little sister at the time, and I said, I know you're on your way to work, but I need you to come here. And by the time she got to my house, I was on the toilet, like full on miscarrying the baby.
mm,
It was like clots so big that like the water was splashing back. And we had called my midwives, and they're like, go to the hospital. So the whole entire way to the hospital, it felt like active labor is what it felt like
mm-hmm.
now that I've had two kids. And we ended up going to the ER, and they do the vaginal ultrasound. And I can tell by just like reading the ultrasound tech's body language that something wasn't right.
Right.
Uh, and the doctor had come in and said, I'm so sorry you had lost the baby. We don't know what caused it. And that was that. So yeah, having a miscarriage after an abortion it was like one trauma after another that my family had to kind of go through. And so, back to Evelyn's birth, I didn't want to tell people early on because of my previous miscarriage, but I ended up having to because I was so sick. I had to tell the people, that I rented from. I had to tell all of my clientele. And there was a part of me that was anxious, like, everybody knows I'm pregnant. What happens if I lose this baby? I'm going to have to like face people and go to my job and people are going to be like, I'm so sorry, how are you doing? And I didn't want that. So I would say like the beginning of my pregnancy, there was this anxiety that I was going to lose Evelyn. After that, I had taken like a leave from work for like a week or so to try and like, get through the throwing up phase. And we needed money. I was the breadwinner. So I got on Zofran, I believe it was, and, did all of the like ginger candies, peppermint in my nose. I did everything I could to try and like make it through work. But at that time I was working like half days. And let's see, around 20 weeks in my pregnancy, I was at work and I was, anytime I would take a new client, I would have like 5 minutes in between where I would kind of like energetically reset myself. I would take a couple deep breaths. I would kind of check in with my body because I think in that intimate space, there's like an energy exchange. And I just wanted to make sure that I was okay to receive people. And because I was pregnant, I was more conscious about that time. And I was sitting in the chair in my room and I was like, I just felt wet. And I was like, shit, did I pee myself? Because it's pregnancy, you never know. Sometimes there's like some dribbles. And I get up and I'm like, I look at the seat and it's this tan seat and the whole seat is covered with blood. And when I stand up, there's like just blood gushing all the way down my legs. And I had looked at my calendar and I'm like, oh my God, my client's here. She's checked in. And I'm standing in a pool of my blood. So I'm freaking out. And, I call the gal who does the front desk and did my books. And I'm like, I need you to come down here. And she comes down and she sees that I'm in a pool of my blood. And without even thinking, not even putting gloves on, she's like cleaning up the blood. She's like, we can close down the salon. I can drive you to the hospital. I'm going to tell her that, you have to go. You can't take her. And so at that moment, I was like, no, don't worry about closing down the salon. I will drive myself to the hospital. I had packed like a whole bunch of paper towels in my underwear because there was an insane amount of blood. And I got into my car and I, at the time, was working in Belltown in Seattle, and I was driving to First Hill Swedish. That was the closest hospital. And it took me like 35 minutes to drive there because they were working on the Amazon spheres. And so at that time, the traffic was insane. So I'm in the car. I wasn't having any cramping. I was just bleeding. So there was a part of me like intuitively that was like, maybe I think the baby's still here. But then there was this other part of me that was like, you're having a miscarriage. And so I had called John on the way to the hospital, and I'm like, hey, this is what's going on. I am in a pool of my own blood. I'm driving to the hospital. He had just gotten home. And we live in Renton, which is, 30 minutes, give or take, drive to Seattle. And he's like, okay. So he drove as fast as he could to the hospital. He ended up actually beating me there and was waiting for me in the ER. Yeah. And my little sister too. My Hannah is like a part of my little family. She is my best friend. And so Hannah was there as well. I had called her, and we were in the waiting room, and they checked me in. Swedish First Hill is kind of like just where the area is. It's an interesting hospital at times. Like there was like, not only was I bleeding, but there was like people screaming in the ER. So there was just a lot like sensory overload at the moment. And so they check me in and I get a room. The nurse is like, you're not having any cramping. And I'm like, no. And she's like, well, that's a good sign. I'm like, okay, that there's a fuck ton of blood. We end up getting an ultrasound, and my sister and John were able to be in the room with me for the ultrasound. And as soon as I can see the baby on the screen, it looks like a little frog. Like Evelyn looked like a little frog, like jumping up and down inside of me. And there was this like huge wave of like relief where I could breathe again. And I just like started crying. My sister started crying. John started crying. And, you know, they called it a threatened miscarriage and they didn't know what caused it. The doctor had asked, like, do you want me to check to see if you're dilated? I was like, no, thank you. Just because, you know, I didn't want anybody checking me. I didn't want any kind of, I don't know if you would call that an intervention. And so they sent me home. And after that threatened miscarriage, I took like 3 weeks off of work just to kind of chill. They had said, you know, bed rest isn't something they recommend anymore, just kind of like light duty. Don't lift anything over 20 pounds. Try not to be stressed. After that, my pregnancy I was still really sick and I was worried like I'm going to have a miscarriage at any moment. And so I just didn't go back to work full time. I spent a lot of time kind of honoring my body. And, you know, to be honest, that pregnancy, I was depressed, like looking back at it, like I was very isolated. I was so worried that I was going to lose the baby. There was a part of me that was really struggling with the identity and I guess ego, because I was, you know, making money for the first time and I was the breadwinner and I all of a sudden wasn't because I got pregnant. It was like I had zero control over my body. And it was like a grieving process, I guess is the best way to explain it. It was like the old me was slowly dying and I was stepping into this new person. Towards the end of my pregnancy, I ended up getting diagnosed with gestational diabetes. It wasn't, you know, it was diet controlled and I was able to control my numbers with walking and my diet. John and I had actually gotten really into Pokemon Go at the time because that was like an opportunity for us to like get out and move. And like we would drive to like Chinatown, you know, just to play Pokemon Go. I would say the only big complication was the gestational diabetes. Around 36 weeks, I had an ultrasound with because I was seeing midwives at the time with my midwives, and they had found out that Evelyn was breech. And, you know, at the time, I don't know if it was my headspace or what, but I really trusted all of these medical professionals. Like I was like, I didn't look out, I didn't research a lot of stuff. I had heard, you know, chiropractic work is really great for breech babies, acupuncture. But the midwife that I was working with was a hospital midwife. And she was like, you know, this is what we can do. We can, you know, schedule a version where they manually flip the baby. And I was like, cool, like, let's do that. Not even really knowing like what it was. And so we had scheduled that for like 2 days after, because she had said, you know, at 36 weeks, the baby's so big, you just don't want to, you know, wait too much longer because then, you know, she can be stuck. And so I felt pressure kind of to do that. And the day before my version, or the morning before, it was like 4 a.m. I was having tons of cramping and I had Braxton Hicks my whole pregnancy. So I just kind of was like, these Braxton Hicks are nuts. I had told John, like, you know, something doesn't feel right. I think I need to cancel this. I ended up calling the nurse's line at like 6 o'clock in the morning. And I was like, and my appointment was at 9. I had said, you know, I'm having all of these cramps. It feels worse than the Braxton Hicks. I haven't been able to really like sit down. I've been moving around. Should I cancel? Should I just, you know? And she's like, no, come on in. His name is Dr. Lawrence is going on vacation, so you won't be able to do this. And so I felt this like sense of urgency, but I guess in like looking back at it intuitively, I knew I shouldn't have gone. And when I get into the triage at Valley Medical is where it was, my midwife was there and she was trying to advocate for me. You know, I think looking back, I think I was in labor, honestly, like preterm labor. And I think that she was speculating that too. And we were in the room, and the OB was going over the whole process. Like, this is what we're going to do. We're going to give you this little thing to help relax you. And I'm going to manually like move the baby. And this OB was so cocky. You know, he had said to me, like, I have a great track record with this. Like, there's barely any babies that ever moved for me. And so I can remember looking at my husband, and my husband's really good at reading people. And he was just kind of like, and the midwife was kind of, suggesting certain things to do before, and he kept on talking over her. And I could see her, and she started kind of like getting frustrated, and she left the room. And they didn't check to see if I was dilated or anything. They did hook me up to monitors, and I was having contractions, but they said it was Braxton Hicks before. And so they ended up trying to flip her, and that was unsuccessful. It was extremely painful. I mean, I had looked up like YouTube videos, so mentally I was like, okay, this is what it's going to be like. But on YouTube, when they flip the babies, I feel like it looks like a lot more graceful than it was. And I was trying to breathe through it because it's extremely painful. And I have a high pain tolerance, so I must have looked like I was handling it better than I was. But she only moved about 30%. And then after a certain amount of time, I was like, okay, no more. Like, just, I want to go home. This isn't going to work. And he's like, okay, well, let's schedule a C-section for, 3 weeks from now. And he was on vacation. So it was really all around his schedule, like looking back at it. And so I'm like, okay, we'll schedule the C-section for, I think it was February 3rd. And they sent me home and said, like, just relax, like, put a heating pad, whatever. And when I got home, I had looked in the mirror, and I had bruising all over my abdomen, which was alarming to me.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I'm having really bad cramps. I called them Braxton Hicks. I had told John I'm going to take a bath. And at that time he was taking a nap, and I had lit some candles. I had put on some Zen music because I just was like, these Braxton Hicks are crazy. I can't control these. It turns out that I was in full blown labor. And I was at home laboring for probably 4 hours. After they had sent me home. I was in and out of the bathtub. I didn't really want to wake John up. So I was like kind of doing this by myself. And I think you might know, like, when you're in labor, it's like it can be out of body. It was kind of like this moment where it was like I was in my body. I had control, but I was out of my body at the same time.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. And intuitively I knew what to do. So I would like get out of the bathtub. I would get on my bed on all fours, and I was like rocking back and forth. And finally John wakes up, and he's like, are you okay? And I was like, no, like, I am not okay. I don't know if something is wrong. Maybe the version did something. He had suggested calling my midwives, and they were like, what's the time between the contractions? At that time, I think it was like anywhere from like 5 to 3 minutes in between. And so they're like, you need to come back to the hospital. And we lived like maybe 10 minutes from the hospital. So ended up going back to the hospital, and I was back in triage, the same room that they had the version in. And we had to wait for the ultrasound tech before they could do anything. They knew I was in labor, and they had checked me, and by the time I got back to the hospital, I was 5 centimeters dilated.
Okay.
And they wanted me to wait, before they could do the C-section or whatever, until they gave me an ultrasound. And my husband said we waited probably an hour and a half, and I'm in full blown labor. Like, I'm sweating. I am like, don't touch me. Give me a wet rag. The pain was excruciating, but breech labor is a lot different than, non-breech. I will say that, like, the pain was a little more tolerable than, what is it when it's not breech? What is that called?
Just cephalic, like head down.
Yeah, head down. And so finally the ultrasound tech gets there. She's doing the ultrasound, and it's extremely painful because of the pressure that was on my belly. I'm bruised up. Baby looks good. She's still breech. They finally are like, okay, do you want medication for the pain? And I'm like, hell yeah, give me whatever at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they gave me fentanyl, which, I was like, that's sketch, because when you think of fentanyl, you think of like the straight stuff.
Right.
Um, and as soon as they gave me that, it was like immediate relief. And it seems like 30 seconds after they had given me medication, we were getting rolled off to the OR, and we were in there. It all happened so fast. The doctor who did my surgery, I didn't know. My midwife wasn't, I think the midwife that was there wasn't the one that I had connection with. I feel like it was like 30 minutes. It was just so routine. And during the C-section, I remember like trying to talk to the team that was working on me, like, can I see my placenta? And they're closing me up, and it's like they didn't even acknowledge what I was saying. John was with Evelyn, and I'm like trying to see my placenta, and they're just talking about what they're going to do for the weekend. And, and I'm just like, okay. So I felt like in that moment, so powerless, like, first of all, like my body didn't, like, I just didn't matter. And it was just, I was just a body, and they were working on me. And they close me up and they send us to postpartum. And I can remember just kind of looking at Evelyn like, holy shit, what just happened? Like, she was born at 36 weeks. We're in the room together. Her face was all bruised. And I believe it was probably bruised from them trying to flip her. Coming out of a surgery like that, it was like my body was in shock. John and I took a couple minutes with her to kind of bond before we had called my mom and sister to come in. And when my mom and sister came in, they were like, oh my God, your whole body, like, you look so white. Are you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'm okay. Like, look at my baby. But looking back on Evelyn's birth and, kind of pregnancy, I felt like I didn't have a lot of control, and I didn't advocate for myself. Even though intuitively I knew like I shouldn't have gone to flip her. Like something was telling me like, just don't go. And I could have advocated for myself to even have her vaginally because I was so far along. But I know that a lot of OBs don't like to do that. It's like a liability, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
I did a lot of healing, actually. I ended up having pretty bad postpartum depression after having Evelyn. And I think it was not only the traumatic birth, but the traumatic kind of pregnancy. It was a grief. I was grieving who I was and stepping into this new position of mother. And, when you become a mom, it's like your needs are last. And I don't think a lot of people talk about that. Like, I think when you see like people becoming mothers, it's like this beautiful, like you see these pictures on social media and it's just like this lovely thing. But there's a part of stepping into motherhood that isn't so like fluffy and beautiful. You grieve, you like the old you dies. And so I ended up having like severe postpartum depression with Evelyn. I wasn't like, it wasn't where I wasn't connected to her. I was overly connected. I was worried that she wasn't breathing. I didn't want anybody to touch her. I felt like nobody could take good care of her. And it was kind of a long struggle. But at the time I was in therapy. I had told my therapist what was going on. And I had gotten on meds and really started to kind of heal from the journey. But we didn't have a lot of support. And I think that when you have postpartum depression, like there's a part of the mother that really needs to be like, held, like supported.
Right.
And, I was taking care of this newborn baby and nobody was taking care of me. And I was really struggling with the whole situation. So yeah, that's how Evelyn came into the world.
Man, I just want to say, whew, gosh, that's a lot. That is a lot to even have to go through and process. Like, you had this pregnancy that was tough in itself after having experienced your miscarriage. So having that fear of miscarrying, not even just in the beginning of your pregnancy, but sounds like throughout your pregnancy because of that scare around your 20-week mark of just bleeding. That is a lot. And I just want to like hold you and hug you because that is so intense. Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. And I think that, I mean, I don't even know like really what to say because all of that is so first thing I want to say, I guess, is you're not alone in that at all. I have definitely had some friends or close birth workers who have had similar experiences with that kind of pregnancy. I have a close friend of mine who, again, had a threatened miscarriage around the same time. I think she was probably I want to say like 14 or 16 weeks when it happened to her. And then I had another friend that was around the 20, 22 week mark that had tons of bleeding with kind of no explanation. So you're not alone in that. It happens and it's scary when it does.
It is.
Yeah. Goodness. So I also want to say that you are so fucking strong because I don't know if I would have been able to keep it together like at all in all of those aspects. And I understand during that whole process, you know, having the trust in your providers and being like, okay, hey, this is going on. You should be able to guide me in this. And it sounds like they were trying, but at the same time, you had your intuitive thoughts of being like, I don't know. And this Dr. Lawrence dude sounds like a jackass. I just got to say.
Yeah. No, he totally is and was. And I should have listened to my intuition at that. Just meeting him, like, you know, at the moment when he walked in the door and started talking, we were like, fuck, you know, should we go home, you know?
Right. Yeah. Man, but I will say that I'm happy that John was by your side throughout the whole thing, you know, because some people go through these situations alone. And you had John and your sister Hannah, which I think is awesome to have had that even small support network with you.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, welcome, Evelyn.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. She came in with a bang and she is a force of light. I mean, this kid, she, you know, her birth definitely makes sense with the type of like soul she is. She's a little firecracker.
Yeah, she is also strong in herself, you
Yeah.
know, sticking through, staying strong in that pregnancy with all the things that were going on. So, man, she sounds like she's just like her mama.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
yeah.
So yeah, after that, we weren't really sure if we wanted to have kids. It was like, you know, we did some couples therapy after, you know, for about a year or so. We did individual therapy. We both really wanted to kind of process the birth and then the postpartum stage because when I was having really bad postpartum depression, John was taking care of everything. I mean, he was the one that was doing the laundry. He was the one that was cooking, going to the grocery store. It was just like I felt stuck, like I couldn't do anything but take care of this baby. So I think we were very apprehensive about creating another life. It was something that we had talked about a lot. And, you know, we'd go back and forth and we knew we didn't want two under two because that just sounded really crazy and stressful. And we have a lot of friends that have two under two and, you know, it feels like they don't have time for themselves. So we were like, absolutely not. It was probably around the time Evelyn was 3 where we actually were like, okay, we do want to have another baby. What would that look like? What do we need to do financially to prepare? What do we need to unpack mentally before we prepare? What's the timeline look like? And there was a part of me that was like, okay, I want to wait a year. I want to get in shape. I want to, there's some things I really want to do. And, you know, Evelyn, I think around her 4th birthday, we were like, okay, this is the year. We're going to do this. We're going to do it sometime this year. I knew I wanted to enjoy the summer. So we, you know, enjoyed the summer with Evelyn. And I think around September, we had talked and we were like, okay, let's try to have a baby. Like, this is my last period. I haven't been on birth control since I had Evelyn. So I always just tracked it. And I was like, okay, this is the time where we need to do this. And we we tried once, and after we had tried once, I John and I both talked, and we were like, shit, like we need to wait a whole other year. Like we're not ready. Um, we had a whole list of things we wanted to do. Like, let's pay off this debt. Let's travel here. And the next month comes along, and I'm like, shit, I am pregnant. Like I knew intuitively I was pregnant. And I had tons of pregnancy tests at my house just because I was tracking my period, and there was a part of me that was always anxious I was going to get pregnant.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had gone to my bathroom, and I had taken the pregnancy test, and looking at it, and immediately there was 2 lines. And so I'm like, oh, there's a part of me that was like a little like, oh shit. But then I just remember feeling so much more excited this round because it was planned, and I was like, okay, and John and Evelyn were downstairs, and I remember coming downstairs with my pregnancy test, and I'm like, I have to tell you something. And he's like, what? And I hand him the test, and he's like, wait, what? Are you serious? And I'm like, yeah, because we had literally just tried one time. And he's like, are you fucking kidding me? And I'm like, no. And so, we were like, okay, we're having a baby. It was September. And I had looked at my calendar. I'm really into like astrology. So I'm like, okay, so what sign would this baby be? And I was like, okay, I had calculated, my due date was like around June 15th. And I was like, yes, it's going to be a Gemini. I'm super excited. And my pregnancy in the beginning was, it seemed to be going really well. Like for the first 6 weeks, like anytime I was pregnant, I always knew I was pregnant right away.
Mm-hmm.
And then around the 7-week mark, I had extreme morning sickness again. This time it was a lot worse. Like I needed to get IV fluids. I was on a different medication.
So were you diagnosed with like hyperemesis gravidarum?
Yes. Yeah, I did. Yeah, I didn't get diagnosed with my first pregnancy, but I'm pretty sure that's what I had.
Mm-hmm.
I was vomiting probably anywhere from 8 to 11 times a day.
Oh God.
Yeah. And I was losing weight. And so, I had this 4-year-old or 3-year-old, because she was 3 at the time. And I had to take care of her. And at the time she was in a co-op preschool. So parents are super involved. And I was taking her to school, and I remember just like throwing up in their bathroom, and there's like kids in the stalls next to me, like, what is she doing? Is she, is she throwing up? And I'm like, so
it's so interesting to little minds,
Yeah, like, was she all right? And I had decided to take a leave from her school because I had to be so involved. And for probably, I would say up until 12 weeks, exactly 13 weeks, I was super sick. I was vomiting. I would wait till John came home from work, and I would like go to the hospital to get fluids. I was on this crazy medication. I can't remember the name of it, but it made me super drowsy. And it seemed to work a little bit, but I knew that there was some crazy side effects. And so I was like, I didn't want to take it long term. But about probably 12 and a half weeks, I stopped getting sick. And I just remember feeling like a brand new person. I was like, I can eat again. I can, I just felt nourished, because I think when you're that sick, you just feel so malnourished and dehydrated.
And just starved, like, because everything you put in your body just ejects itself.
Yeah. And there wasn't really anything I could eat. Toast didn't work. There wasn't really anything. Pretzels didn't really work. That I could keep down. Bananas, I ate a lot of bananas because they tasted the same going up as they did going down. But yeah, so around 13 weeks or 12 weeks, I was feeling good. And then at 13 weeks, my husband and I were being intimate, and I all of a sudden feel this gush of something. And I look, and I'm in a pool of my own blood. Like, it's like,
Damn, man.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's more blood than my first pregnancy. And I like run to the bathroom and I sit on the toilet and there's a trail of blood, um, you know, to the toilet. And I'm just sitting there and I call my little sister. It's probably like 11:30 at night. And I'm like, Hannah, can you come and watch Evelyn? Like, we need to go to the hospital. I think I'm having another, threatened miscarriage. And she's like, okay. And I knew intuitively that Jack was okay because I wasn't cramping. Like, with
Mm-hmm.
my miscarriage, I knew what a miscarriage felt like, and I knew what active labor felt like. So this time around with the bleeding, I was like, it was a lot of blood. It's never not alarming when you see that much blood. Um,
Right.
but at around 11:35, my sister comes to my house. She lives 6 blocks from me. So it was like she just got in the car and came, and she's like, go to the hospital. John ended up taking me, and they had found that I had a subchorionic hemorrhage.
Mm.
And there's a hematoma that was like 1.5 to 1.9 centimeters. So it wasn't super small, but it wasn't super big.
Mm-hmm.
And the doctor had said, these typically resolve. I was 13 weeks at the time. He said, your placenta is going to move around. We'll just kind of watch it. After that incident, I had one more major bleed, and that sent me back to the hospital. And they checked, and it was, I think, 3 days after my first bleed,
Mm.
and the hematoma actually was getting smaller, which was a really good sign. And the blood wasn't like super bright red; it was kind of more brown, and so I felt like a relief. And intuitively, I was like, this baby's going to be okay. I can remember checking in with him and being like, you have to stay here. Like, I really want you to be here. And so I kind of was on, pelvic rest. They were like, you
Mm-hmm.
probably shouldn't have sex until this resolves. I was on light duty, so I couldn't lift anything. Having a 3-year-old is really tough when you can't really lift. If she would get hurt, I would be like, it's like your body's natural reaction to pick him up. And so there would be moments where
Mm-hmm.
I'd pick her up and I'd be like, oh shit, I'm not supposed to do this. This pregnancy, it was like one thing after another. So like going through this, I'm like, holy shit. Because
Yeah.
it almost feels like it wasn't me, like it's a movie or something. Um,
Mm.
so my husband and I decided to do like a little baby moon. We went to the coast. We actually got married on Washington coast. And so it's one of these places that like it means something to us. He and I had our first baby moon there. So we stayed in the same hotel. We had decided to like drive up through northern Washington and around. And we had gone to like Ruby Beach and Claylock. And I wouldn't call them like hikes, but we did a lot of nature walks. And,
Mm-hmm.
um, being in nature is like, I crave it. Like it's so grounding to me. I need that kind of connection to feel human. And
Mm-hmm.
so I was pushing myself a little more than I normally would because I was like, trying to take it in. And um, we ended up getting to our hotel, and I was like, I'm really crampy. Like I might need to like just kind of chill out. And I remember John being like, okay, so we'll just get food in and we'll like lay in bed and watch movies. And that's what we did. But the whole time we were on our baby moon, I kept on saying to him, like, something doesn't feel right. Like, I'm just feeling really crampy. Something doesn't feel right. On our baby moon was the first time that I actually felt Jack move from the outside of my belly. So I was like, okay,
Mm.
something doesn't feel right, but he's in there and I can feel him. So I was kind of reassured. And I think we stayed on the coast for like 2 days. And on the second day, right before we were leaving, I went to the bathroom and I noticed that there was some mucus in my underwear.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was like Googling, is this my mucus plug?
Mucus plug.
What does this
Yeah.
look like? And it was just a little bit.
And
And
how many weeks were you at this point?
I was 22 weeks, 21 weeks, almost
Okay.
22.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so I had called my midwives on Monday after we had gotten back, and I'm like, hey, like, I'm having some cramping, I'm losing some mucus. They had asked me to take pictures. I'm like, yeah, I've been taking pictures this whole time. So I like sent them through email like 4 different pictures of the mucus. They had suggested I come in and get an ultrasound, and then, you know, they asked like, do you want us to check you? And going into the pregnancy, I didn't want to be checked, but I was like, yes, just check me, like make sure everything's okay. I wasn't dilated, but when they gave me the ultrasound, they found that my cervix was thinning, and it was, I think the normal like length of a cervix is supposed to be like 4 centimeters. Mine was 1.1 centimeters in length.
Wow. So
Yeah.
you were effacing with those cramps.
Yes, and I could feel it. And they asked, like, do you want to get like, do you want to have another ultrasound tomorrow, or do you want to wait? Because I had one scheduled for Monday, and this, I had gone in on a Monday, and I was like, no, I need to be checked tomorrow. And so they gave me another ultrasound, and I was like 1 centimeter in length, so it was slow moving. They had prescribed me progesterone, so I was doing progesterone suppositories. I think that's what you call them when you put them in vaginally, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, they had gone over like the risks, like this is what could happen. You know, we call this incompetent cervix, and true incompetent cervix is like where you don't feel that you are thinning. And I was feeling it. So I kept on saying to my OB, like, is this the correct like diagnosis? Because I can feel that my body's changing. And she's like, we have to call it this for insurance purposes. And they had talked about like a possible cerclage, but they had gone over like the data with the progesterone and how like effective it could be. Anyways, on Tuesday, they asked if I wanted to come back in on Thursday or wait until Monday. And I was like, yes, please, I need to be seen on Thursday. And I went on Thursday, and at this point I was working with like high risk doctors at Swedish.
Okay, so not at Valley anymore.
No, I had switched care to Swedish Issaquah because of my experience with Valley.
Okay, so this whole pregnancy you were at Swedish.
No, okay, so this is a huge part that's actually missing. In the beginning of the pregnancy with Jack, I was being seen at Valley, and I really loved my midwives at Valley, but every time I had thought about giving birth at Valley, I felt anxiety. Like it was like inside of my whole body. It just didn't feel right. So at 20 weeks, I actually switched care to Swedish.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy. I had called Swedish, and I was like, do you Swedish Issaquah, do you guys have any openings, or would you guys be able to switch care? And the nurse that I talked to was really helpful. I told her about like, you know, my subchorionic hematoma. I told her about the morning sickness. And she said, we actually only have one June spot left for a June delivery. And I was like, I'll take it. You know, I'll take it. I'm going to go. And so I switched care at 20 weeks just because I intuitively was like, this isn't the right fit for me. Like this, I can't have my baby at this hospital.
Yeah. Valley was no longer what your family needed.
And no, it wasn't safe. It just didn't feel safe.
Yeah.
Back to the cerclage. It was a Thursday, and I had gone in for my ultrasound, and the high risk doctor that I was working with was this like really smart older man. Like he just had this presence about him where I was like, this guy knows what he's talking about. And they did the ultrasound. They had done all the measurements of my cervix, and he comes in and he is like, you know, it just keeps on getting thinner. Right now, your cervix length is measuring at 0.8 millimeters. And so I'm going to recommend that you go and move forward with the cerclage. This is what we do before we can like okay you for a cerclage. We do the amniocentesis, and he kind of went over that. He had said we don't do cerclages here at Swedish Issaquah. So, you know, go home and get whatever you need, pick up your husband and go to First Hill, but I need you to go there like as soon as possible. And so I'm like, okay, and I thought I was just going to go to First Hill so they could like check me out. I pick up John which is in Renton. So I went from Issaquah to Renton, and then we are in First Hill, and they checked us into the antepartum unit. I thought that we were going to be at triage. So I had like phoned in to triage, and they're like, oh, actually you're across the hall. You're going to be in antepartum. And so I was like, okay, that's kind of weird. And they put us in a room with like a bed. And I'm like, this is weird, because I didn't know that we were staying the night. And I had asked the nurse, like, are we staying the night? And she's like, yeah, did they not tell you? And I was like, no, nobody had told us that we're staying the night. So we didn't have any of our things. And she kind of explained, like, the doctor's going to come in and talk to you. I believe the OB I saw was Dr. Tran. She was awesome. She had this like very confident presence about her. She's like probably like 4'11". But like just like such a big personality. And she's like, this is what's going on. If your amniocentesis comes back and there's no infection present, we will schedule your cerclage for tomorrow at 10 a.m. She went over like the amniocentesis procedure. She said the buildup is going to be a lot more stressful than the actual procedure. And it felt like a full-on surgery. Like they had come into the room. There was like 5 people. There was the ultrasound tech. There was, 2 or 3 nurses. She had draped me and had to, put iodine on me.
Similar sounding to cesarean, like all the drapes and everything.
Yeah. And that's what it felt like. And I was like anxious, and she showed me the needle, and I could see the needle on the ultrasound, and she was super quick with it. And as soon as she took it out, I was like, oh, that's it. And she's like, yeah. And she had shown me like the vial of my amniotic fluid, and it was like a strawberry color, I think is how she explained it, which indicated that there was some bleeding. And they said that they should have the results back like in 2 to 4 hours. And with Swedish, they have my chart, so I can log in and see like my results. And I kept on like refreshing it to see, because the nurses hadn't been back in. And I think after 2 hours after the procedure, I got the test results and it said no infection present. And so I was like, yes. And I had told John, I had, texted Hannah, texted my family, like no infections present. Like I'm going to get this cerclage tomorrow. And the nurse came in like an hour later, and she was like, oh, I have great news. And I'm like, I already know, like, and so they had gone over like what the cerclage was going to look like the next day, that I wasn't going to be fully out. They were going to do like a spinal, and gone over the stitch. And yeah, so I was lucky to get the cerclage at 22 weeks. It wasn't like a super smooth thing. I can remember being in the OR, because they wheeled me to an OR. It was kind of a big deal.
Right.
And they did the spinal, and I could see them kind of working on me with the overhead light. I could look and I could see kind of like,
because they're like the reflection from the light.
Yeah. And I'm nosy, and I want to see like what's going on with my body. And so
yeah, it's like a roundabout way of it being a mirror, honestly. A lot of people like, don't look at the lights if you don't want to see what's going on in your C-section. If you want to look at the lights, because you can see. Yeah. And
I was like, hell yeah, let me look. Like, what a cool opportunity. And Dr. Tran was like, talking, and she's like, I need different forceps. She's like, Anissa, I'm so sorry. Your anatomy is so like, your cervix is so much further up and like kind of at an angle that I had to get longer like forceps. So the cerclage placement took a little longer than expected. And yeah, I spent, I think, a total of 2 nights in the hospital with that whole ordeal. They ended up giving me, I think it was like 1.5 centimeters in length with the cerclage. But Dr. Tran had said, after I had gotten out of, I guess they call it a surgery, the cerclage surgery, she said, you're really lucky that you caught it when you did. Your cervix length was 0.6 millimeters at the time that I placed the cerclage. So
wow, so it was going. Yeah.
I trusted my body, and that, I think there's a part of you that when you're pregnant and you're constantly like calling to be like, something doesn't feel right. I'm having like a little cramp. You're like, am I being dramatic?
Mm.
But I wasn't. I was listening to what was going on, and they had saved my baby, really, is what it was.
Yeah.
And my intuition and connection with my body saved Jack. And so I felt really proud of myself for trusting my body, for trusting my intuition, and for reaching out and being like, no, I need you to check me on Thursday instead of Monday.
Right. So, because, yeah, if it was, you probably got, from the sounds of it, based off of like the amount of days you were in, you went in to see the doctor to talk about the cerclage at Swedish Issaquah on Thursday. And then they sent you Thursday night to Swedish First Hill.
They sent me right away from Issaquah. So I went straight from Swedish Issaquah on Thursday. And I think I got there around like 11 or 12 p.m. or 11 a.m. or 12 p.m. So I went straight from Issaquah to First Hill. Like I had gone home to pick up John, and yeah.
And then so 2 days later, like you had your cerclage before Monday was even there.
Yeah. Had I waited till Monday, I would have lost him, is basically, if I would have waited, because I had the cerclage placed on a Friday, if I would have waited one more day, I would have had Jack. And they had gone over like the risks of having a 22-week-old baby and like what that looks like. And, they said they don't really do a lot of intervention at that point because they don't really consider it like viable. And so in my head, I was like, fuck, like I'm going to lose this baby, and it's going to be a miscarriage, but it's going to be like a basically like a almost fully developed. Like it's going to look like a human.
It's going to be an obvious human. Yeah.
But yeah, so and Dr. Tran had said to me, like when she discharged me, like this cerclage is going to give you at least 10 weeks. And I'm like, awesome. Okay. So what does 10 weeks look like? That's like 32 weeks. And she's like, but most people, they go full term with these cerclages, and you might even go later. Like it's super common. And so I was kind of expecting that. I had joined like these cerclage groups on Facebook, support groups, so I could like see other people's journeys. And a lot of the moms did go like past their due dates and were super uncomfortable. I think the standard was to remove the cerclage at 36 weeks. And a lot of moms, it was somewhat common to have your baby after the cerclage was removed at 36 weeks.
Yeah.
And so mentally I was preparing myself like, okay, I'll have another 36-week-old baby. I'm praying that he comes around then because I was really uncomfortable. I ended up going into labor at 32 weeks and 3 days. Like a few days before I went into labor, I remember telling John and my mom lives in Tennessee, and she had come early to help me prep for Jack and help take care of Evelyn. And so she's staying with us. And I can remember telling both of them like a couple of days before, like every day, I feel like he's coming. Like, I just feel like something's different. Like I just feel, and this happened with Evelyn too. Before I had her, it was like I couldn't sleep the night before. Like it was, and so I couldn't sleep. And I think it was like April 23rd. And we had gone to visit John's cousin because it's his birthday, and we had brought him like a cupcake. And I'm cramping at their house, and I go to the bathroom, and I'm like, okay, there's my underwear. There's like some kind of like, my underwear is wet. Like, did I pee, or, is this amniotic fluid? And I had Evelyn in the bathroom with me. And I'm just like, I don't want to be dramatic. Like it's his cousin's birthday. So I'm like texting John, like on the side, like, hey, like, let's get out of here. I'm feeling really crampy. And we ended up leaving their house, and the whole car ride home, I was like, okay, these Braxton Hicks are getting crazy. Like this feels, a little more intense than it did earlier today. And as soon as I get home, I like run to the bathroom because I felt like I needed to poop. Like there was so much like pressure. And I'm sitting on the toilet, and I'm like, I'm going to call my OB. And so I called, and they were like, the nurse on call was like, okay, get off the toilet, like do not go poop. How long will it take you to get here? And I was like, probably like 30 minutes or so. John and I didn't pack a bag. So I get off the toilet and I'm like, hey John, we need to go. We need to go to Swedish as a cloth. Like we need to be there now. And so we didn't pack a bag. We headed straight there. And
so Evelyn stayed with your mom at home?
Yeah, Evelyn stayed with my mom. And I don't think my mom really realized like what was going on. It just happened so fast. I think I had been seen so many times during my pregnancy that I think my whole support was just kind of like, okay, this is another thing. Like the main event's not here.
Mm-hmm.
We ended up being in triage and they hooked me up to the monitors and I was having contractions and they started getting, closer together. And the nurse that was there was like, oh, like, I don't think that these are Braxton Hicks, Anissa. And we were timing them and there was an OB, I can't remember her name, but she had this like presence about her that was just so like, it was cold, but it was like, in the same sense, it was like she was also a little warm. I don't know how to explain it, but she's like, can we check you? And I was like, yes, whatever you need to do. She checked me. I had started to dilate. So they had told us to like, you're gonna be checked in. We're gonna monitor you. You're not going anywhere tonight. So like, call whoever to get your bags. And they had talked about preterm labor and a baby that is born at 32 weeks gestation, what to expect. The viability was 99%. He could have some like breathing issues. They did talk about like lung development, and they gave me one steroid shot, which is like a super long needle and super painful. And saying that, like, in labor, I'm like, this needle is super painful. So it must have been like kind of a big deal. But they move us into a room, and the Swedish Issaquah suites are like, it seems like a hotel. Like it was like,
yeah.
I walked in, there's like this beautiful tub and it's this huge room and there's like views of the mountains, and I'm like taking it all in. I'm breathing it all in because I'm like, this is my redemption birth. Like I had gone into my pregnancy with Jack, like this is my redemption. I am going to make this pregnancy and this birth different. Like I'm going to make it what I wanted.
Right.
I'm like taking it all in, and I'm like taking a video of the room and sending it to like my best friend. Like, look at this beautiful room. Hopefully I can use this tub. And my contractions started getting like, a lot closer together and a lot more painful. And I wasn't expecting this amount of pain, honestly, because breech labor just feels different. Like it didn't feel as much pressure as a head down baby. And, every contraction, it was just like pressure. And it felt like this is like super graphic, but I felt like my like vagina and butthole were going to like rip open, and I just wasn't expecting that. And so I'm like going to the bathroom, I'm trying to walk around, and, going into my pregnancy, I was like, I don't want an epidural. Like, I don't want Pitocin. I wanted to try and do everything as like natural as I could, but I also went into it with like an open mind that like, you just never know what's going to happen. So I wasn't like super stuck on my like birth plan.
Right. And so I have a quick question. When you got pregnant with Jack, as soon as you found out you were pregnant, you were like, okay, I'm going to do a VBAC.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Sounds like you were planning for a VBAC and you're like, yeah, my redemption, we're doing this. Like, we're going to do it as smooth as possible this time without a cesarean.
Yeah.
Correct?
Yeah, I'd gone into it like,
okay.
This is my redemption birth. I wanted to feel a vaginal birth. Like, and when I remember talking to people about it, like, this is what I want to feel, as weird as that might sound. And moms who have had vaginal births are like, no, like that totally makes sense, as my contractions were getting stronger and closer together, I just looked at my nurse and I was like, I'm going to need some medication. Like, we were they were monitoring me to see if they could keep me for 24 hours to administer the other steroid shot. And that was the hope. But there was a part of me that was like, just, you don't have to be in pain. So just get the epidural. Actually, I want to go back because they had talked about if I was to have a C-section, the risks of not getting an epidural in labor, because I had told them I wanted to try and not do it. And they said, if you end up needing like an emergency C-section, we'll have to completely knock you out if you don't have an epidural.
Yeah.
And so I was like, okay. So as my labor was progressing, I said, yes, give me the epidural. It was super smooth. I felt amazing. I don't know if you've ever had an epidural, but oh my God, like when you go from that excruciating pain to like no pain, I felt like a completely different person. I mean, I was like laughing. I was like, I was in a great mood. I was joking around with everybody. And they had asked me after I had gotten the epidural, do you want us to remove your cerclage now, or do you want to try and hold off to see if we can get you another steroid shot? Because you need, I think it's 12 hours after every shot, or 24. I was just like, I didn't even think about it. I was like, take out the cerclage, like take it out, like let's get it out. And I think this was about like 3 a.m. And I remember telling my nurse, like, tell me when you think I need to call Hannah to come, because I really wanted her to be there. And I was like honest with her, like, I don't know what it's like to have a normal birth, so I don't know what the best time is for that. And so she, as they're getting the cerclage stuff ready, she says, I think it's time to call Hannah. And so I call Hannah. Hannah's on her way. By the time she arrives, she said I was spread eagle with like 3 people all up in my business trying to get the cerclage out. And they had the hardest time getting it out. It took them 2 hours total.
Wow.
Yeah, because of my anatomy. And so they had gotten most of it out, but there was like a piece that was stuck, and I was adamant, like I really wanted to have a vaginal birth. And so the OB that was working on it was like, we need to get this stitch out, because if we don't, and you end up having a vaginal birth, it can be really dangerous.
Yeah.
And so she called in another OB, and they worked on me for like another 30 minutes and finally got it out. Hannah said there was like blood everywhere when she came in, but I couldn't feel it. I was like laughing and,
right.
And so the cerclage was out. They had told me to rest and kind of see like what, just see how the labor progressed. And I started dilating pretty quickly after they had taken out the cerclage.
Because that restriction was gone.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was just like, and then all of a sudden it stopped. And so probably around like 6 a.m., I had felt like wetness, because my water hadn't broken at that point. And the nurse had tested it, and she's like, yes, your water did break. It's, amniotic fluid. And then she had laid me on my side with a peanut in between my legs and was like, just get as much rest as you can. Like, I know it's impossible. It's hard to ask or hard to say, when you're in labor to get rest. The OB, her name was Dr. Hausha. She was the OB on call that day. I remember she walked in at like maybe like 7:30. And she had this presence about her that was like she was just a real human, she was like this like Asian woman who she walked in, and she was like, with OBs or people in medicine, sometimes there can be this presence about them where they like know what's best for you. But she was like, what do you want? How can I help you, have the birth that you want? And we talked about it. I said, absolutely no Pitocin. I did not want Pitocin. She said, all right, like we won't do that. She's like, do you mind if I check you? I said, whatever, yes. And she had found that when she checked me that I was dilating, I think I was like 5 centimeters at that point. And she could see Jack's head and was like, oh, he has a lot of hair. Like, she had found that my water wasn't completely broken. Like she had felt the stuff, and she asked like, do you mind if I break your water? I said, sure, whatever. She broke my water, and it was like this huge gush. And at this time, like Hannah was sleeping next to my bed. She can sleep through anything. And I had, before they had broke my water, I was like, hey, John was also sleeping. I'm like, you need to be awake for this.
Mm-hmm.
And my labor just got more intense after that. And I started dilating a lot quicker. And around 8 a.m., Jack's stats started dropping. Like, so I was moving around. I had read a lot before this pregnancy about like certain things to do in labor if that happens. It's hard to move when you have an epidural, but I kept on asking like my nurse, can we do this position? Can we do this position? I ended up getting on all fours with a ball and kind of rocking back and forth. And at that point, the whole entire room is filled with people, like nurses, people in surgical gear. They had handed John stuff and said, you might need this. Dr. Hausha had waited and she was just monitoring me. Because she knew that's what I really wanted. And she's like, come on, baby Jack, come on, like, let's get it together. And finally she just called it and was like, Anissa, I'm so sorry. We need to get you into OR. Like, his stats are dropping. We need to make sure that he's okay. Like, are you okay with that? And I was like, hell yeah, like whatever you need to do. And so I feel like I was in the OR like within 30 seconds. Must have been on the same floor. I mean, everything happened so fast, and so I knew what to expect because I had a C-section before. This team felt a little different though. Everybody was super warm, and they had said, the NICU team is going to be at the head of your bed for Jack when he's delivered, and they'll probably work on him right away. And so they're doing a C-section. Everything's going great. They take him out and I can hear a really loud cry, which is like, when you're having a premature baby, hearing them cry is huge because you just never know what's going to happen. They pulled down the screen and I could see him and he looked like chunky. And they moved him immediately to the NICU table. And I was like, I could look at him, and I had John go with him because I was like, please just make sure he's okay. And so I had my neck cranked, and I was looking back and watching them work on him. And, I could hear things like, we need a CPAP. Like, they were working really quick. There must have been like maybe 6 people working with Jack. And I make eye contact with John, and he kind of nods to me like, Jack's okay, So I'm like, cool. And I'm like, they're closing me up meanwhile while I'm watching this. And it's like standard C-section stuff. Like, I'm like, this is what to expect. And as I'm watching them work on Jack, I start to feel like really, really, really tired and really cold. And at this point I was completely stitched up. Like, they were talking like, okay, she's sutured up. And I remember looking at the anesthesiologist and I told her like, I'm going to close my eyes really quick because I'm really tired. And I'm really cold. Do you think you can get me a blanket? And so they got me a blanket. And at that point, John had come to the head of the bed with Jack, and I got to like hold him, and I gave him a kiss and I said, I love you. And they were headed to the NICU. And not long after they left, I could hear Dr. Hausha say, she's bleeding. We need to get this clotted. We need to, let's administer, I think it was Pitocin. Let's administer oxytocin. They had given me 5 different medications to try and get my uterus to contract and to stop bleeding. And I could hear the whole process while they were all working on me. She's like, we need to measure the blood. What's the measurements of the blood? And everybody's talking and everything's happening so quickly. And, she's like, let's get the balloon in. And the balloon basically was to stop the bleeding, like to give them some time. I don't know if you know how they work. You probably know better than me.
Was it like a Foley catheter balloon where it went to in your cervix? Yeah. So when you get a Foley balloon, it's kind of like a peanut shaped balloon on a catheter, basically. And so they insert it with the catheter and then they fill it up with, usually I believe it's liquid, like saline water, so that there's pressure on both sides of your cervix. So your cervical opening would be on the indentation of the peanut balloon kind of thing.
Okay.
And then that just puts pressure on your cervix to kind of, in this situation, probably just kind of plug it to like, so they can, you know, see how much blood has been lost. Usually it's used to like help dilate from the pressure, like kind of like a manual dilation. But in this case, you had already had a baby, so they were probably doing it to plug it up and say pause.
Yeah. And I could hear her like, I've got the balloon in, and then all of a sudden it's not working. She said, you know, we need to call the IR, let them know we're headed down. And I don't know what IR stands for. Is that?
I don't know. I don't know. I'll have to look that one up. IR.
I believe it was because they wanted to cauterize something. So they wanted to send me down to get some cauterization going on. And I could still hear them working. You know, she's like trying to get the balloon to work, measuring the blood. She had said to the anesthesiologist, like, we need a massive blood transfusion. We need to get her blood. Then they were like screaming out that my blood type, you know, and I could see people coming in through the door with like blood. And finally, Dr. Hausha comes to the head of my bed, and she grabs my hand and she looks at me and she says, "I'm so sorry, Anissa, but I think we're going to have to give you a hysterectomy. We don't have time. We don't have time to make it to the OR." And I just look at her and I'm like, okay, you know, because I just knew I could feel that I was dying, right? Like it was, my body was in complete shock. And I'm like, okay, like whatever you need to do. She said, I'm going to go in through your C-section incision, and we're going to kind of go through there. So I'm going to have to reopen you. And I was like, okay. And she said, we're going to intubate you. We're going to be putting you out. Are you okay with this? And I'm like, yes. And so they gave me a hysterectomy, not a complete hysterectomy because I had lost so much blood. My total blood loss was 4.6 liters. I had
goodness gracious,
0.4 liters left. So I was very close to death. And, you know, I felt like it, like in the OR, I could feel like my soul, as crazy as it sounds, was leaving my body. It was like, it was so peaceful at one point after I didn't feel cold and after I didn't feel super tired. It was just like this huge sense of peace, like, you know, and I ended up waking up in the ICU, shackled to my bed. And I look at John and I'm like, you know, and I'm still intubated and I'm like, what is going on? And he had said, well, you tried ripping out your IVs and your tubes. So, you know, and so they gave me a whiteboard and I kept on writing like, you know, please hand express me. Like I need to get this milk going. And he had said that he had asked the nurse to give me more medication to knock me out before they could extubate me. And she's like giving me more medication, but I'm still like alert. And she had said to him, like, she's not going to remember any of this. Like, she's fine. Like, you're fine. And I did remember it. And they gave me a whiteboard to talk back and forth. And so eventually the nurse was advocating for me. And she's like, you know, I think Anissa's ready to get extubated, because they were trying to keep me in the ICU overnight. But I knew that I needed to get out of there if I wanted to see Jack. I knew that if I was able to go to the NICU, I had to be out of the ICU. I couldn't be in there. And so I kept on writing on the board, like, you know, I'm ready. And they had to monitor me. I can't remember for how long, but they ended up extubating me, and they sent me to postpartum. And I remember the OB coming to talk to me, and a few nurses, and they had said, like, you might have a really hard time creating milk because of your blood loss. So please don't be discouraged, because that was my biggest thing coming out of surgery. I need to be able to have milk for my baby. He's preemie. I want him to have my milk. I want him to have this. And so I was kind of like, okay, I need to get pumping. As soon as I got into my postpartum room, I was like, where's my pump? Like, I need to get
Mm-hmm.
this going. I didn't even have a pump bra, like a proper pump bra. So I had Jimmy ribbed my bra.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so I ended up seeing Jack in the NICU for the first time. I think it was 5 a.m. after my hysterectomy and C-section. And I couldn't touch him because he was hooked up to all of these cords, and he had a cord in his belly for his blood gases because they weren't.
Mm.
Um, like when he was born, his APGAR score was 1. And
Mm.
then 5 minutes later, I believe it was an 8. And so I couldn't hold him, which, nothing really prepares you for that. Like as a mom, you give birth and you want to hold your baby. I couldn't even see him because they had like a hat on him. I didn't know what his head looked like. I didn't know how much, hair he had. He had a CPAP.
Right.
And I was just like in so much pain. I just remember standing there like, holy shit, what the hell happened? And even the NICU nurse that was there was like, I cannot believe you're here right now. Like, how are you getting out of the wheelchair? How are you alive? And everybody during this process kept on saying that to me, like, how are you walking? How are you alive? Like, how are you going to the bathroom? Because I don't think I really realized like what had happened. My body was in shock for
Mm-hmm.
probably like a week after I gave birth to him. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Goodness. Anissa, gosh, that is. And then, so tell me again how old Jack is now.
He's 2.5 months. And so his adjusted age, I believe, is 18 days.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm still in this like
Wow.
postpartum, like I'm trying to process this trauma. I'm in therapy. I made it a point to talk to my OB because I wanted to know what happened while I was out. And she went over my chart notes like one by one and was just like, they cauterized this, they did this. And she also mentioned that it's really rare that I remember everything that happened in the OR. And I feel like for me, remembering everything has helped me with the process because I know that they tried everything that they could to save my uterus and to save me.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, it's crazy because nothing really prepares you for birth, let alone like a near-death experience. I can't even explain how I feel. Like I feel like I'm a different person. Like I'll never be the same person after this experience. It's like, it's like my second chance at life. Like I catch myself looking at John and Evelyn and Jack thinking like, holy shit, like this, there was a possibility that I wouldn't be able to be here in this moment. And it wasn't that long ago, right? Like,
Right. Yeah. Anissa, like I just have goosebumps right now, like just thinking of all of this and hearing this. And like, I just get so emotional because, just hearing your story, first off, thank you so much for sharing your stories. These are so in-depth, huge things, like each pregnancy, each decision that you made with each, pregnancy and just like getting to where you're at right now. Wow. You know, like just wow. There's so much that could be said, needs to be said, and just heard about everything. But right now, I feel like the best thing I could do is just provide space.
yeah, well, thanks for giving me that space.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so happy that you had decided to reach out and share your stories because things that you experienced throughout your pregnancies and your births, they deserve to be heard because goodness gracious, people forget that this is a thing. That having a baby isn't super easy all the time. Being pregnant isn't super easy. And I am happy that you're here,
Thank you.
that you're alive, that you have a second chance at life to be able to experience and watch your babies grow up,
Thank
you
you.
know?
I feel
Yeah.
really honored, honestly, to be here today. And thank you for giving me the space to share this. I feel like
Oh,
I
yeah.
was kind of all over the place with my stories. I realize that I'm still like in the thick of processing it. when when it comes to something that's traumatic, it's not something that you can heal or process overnight. Like it comes in waves.
Yeah.
But yeah. And I feel really lucky to have had the team that I did on that day, and really the support. Everybody at Issaquah was like, if I felt like everybody knew who I was and they knew about my story. I had nurses from the NICU be like, I can't believe you're alive. Like, you're so lucky. How are you doing? Even my postpartum nurses were like, I was in excruciating pain, and they're like, you just had a hysterectomy. Like, this is not like a normal C-section, so it makes sense that you would be in this kind of pain. But yeah, it was kind of a lot. And thanks for listening and hearing the story.
Oh, yeah. Oh, gosh. Yeah, absolutely. Man, I mean, I have a few questions. So you had mentioned that it wasn't a full hysterectomy.
Yeah.
What does that entail?
So there's two arteries at the bottom of your uterus. And this is how they explained it to me, that with a complete hysterectomy, they would cauterize those and take the whole entire uterus. But because I had lost so much blood, they didn't want to risk messing with those arteries, because it was literally a matter of life or death. And they had to work really quickly. So I still have a little bit of my uterus. Apparently there's this very small chance I can still have a period. They did also keep my ovaries. So I'm not in menopause or anything like that. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That's not something that I had even heard of or like considered being a possibility, but it makes total sense. Just like if somebody was getting a different organ replaced, or if there was like cancer on part of an organ, you could take part of it out and not all of it out. So that is very interesting.
Yeah.
Good thing they made that case, not messing with those arteries, because you didn't have much left in you. So
no, I would have died. It's crazy when I got home, because we don't work on the metric system here. And so I was like, what is 0.4 liters in cups? And it was 1.6 cups of blood is what I had left. So in total, I had received 18 bags of blood product.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. Goodness. Ooh. That's a lot. I'm happy that they even had that blood for you.
Yeah, me too.
Like, yeah. Goodness. Yeah, that's really, really awesome. I also want to say, like, I want to commend you and John and Hannah for going through this together, but also just accessing all of the resources that you had at that time. Because, even when you were pregnant with Evelyn, accessing Dr. Lawrence for the ECV, the external cephalic version, like some people don't have access to those as even a possibility. So I think it's awesome that you had that resource and were able to access it. Now, the outcome of that, Dr. Lawrence, again, sounds like a jackass, so that sucks. And also being able to, you said Dr. Hausha?
Yeah.
Yeah, Dr. Hausha sounds like angelic.
Yeah.
Like how she was just saying, like, hey, this is an emergency, but can I? Still asking for permission rather than just doing. The fact that you were still involved in your care and still had agency in these very emergent moments, I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really awesome.
She, I haven't gotten a chance to thank her. And I have this plan to make an appointment with her to be like, thank you for saving my life. I'm still trying to like process it. I want to write her a letter, but yeah, I just feel really lucky. I've had people ask me like, because I think women of color typically get different care sometimes in birth situations. And so I had a friend ask me the other day, like, do you think that they give you a hysterectomy because you're not a white woman? And I was like, no, Dr. Hausha is Asian, and I could hear the whole process. I could hear her process. And yeah, she's one badass OB. So if anybody ever needs like an OB, I'm like, go see Dr. Hausha. Like, she saved my life, really.
Yeah, man, I think that's so beautiful. And for you to have that connection and like to the fact that you know her name means a lot. The fact that you know her name and it's not just this random person that saved your life. You're like Dr. Hausha.
Yeah.
You're the one. You're the one that was running the show and that made it to where you could be here today. I think that's so many things. So many things could be said. I am super thankful that you came on and shared your stories today. I am super thankful that both Evelyn and Jack are here. And I'm thankful that you had the support that you had when you were going through that with Hannah, John, and your mom. And then all of the, medical staff that were there supporting you as well.
Yeah.
I think that's great.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. If you don't mind me asking, you had mentioned that you had really heavy postpartum depression with Evelyn. How are you doing now?
So I would say I'm doing a lot better. Before I got pregnant, I found a psychiatrist that specializes in like all things birth. And my psychiatrist actually was a midwife, and her name is Melissa Rubin. If anybody needs mental health support, Melissa Rubin is fantastic. She is very involved in the birth community in the Seattle area. We talked about like medication and how to kind of prep. So during my pregnancy, I was on antidepressants. Wellbutrin is what I was on. And we had scheduled appointments after Jack was born every 2 weeks to check in. And right after he was born, I was like, yeah, I went through this crazy trauma, but I'm feeling great. And she's like, I think we should probably keep our appointments every 2 weeks. And I'm like, yeah, probably. So our last check-in, I think, was a week ago. And a week ago was not feeling great. I think the lack of sleep, Jack is colicky. So at night he has witching hours. It's not just 1 hour. It's like from 8 to midnight, he just screams. The lack of sleep really can do a lot to the mental health. And so I had basically told her like what was going on. And she had suggested I get on like a low dose SSRI just to kind of give me some extra support in the next coming weeks. So compared to Evelyn, I would say at this point, I feel a lot better. Like I'm able to get out of the house. I've done like a few play dates. I've, gone on like walks with friends without kids. I feel like we have a lot more support this time around. Actually, our support has been extremely overwhelming. The whole time I was in the hospital, we had a friend kind of set up like a meal train. The whole time Jack was in the NICU and I was in the hospital, people fed our family. Like just, people from high school that I hadn't talked to for years were bringing food by. There was also like a section in the meal train to donate money. And so, people had donated, I think it was like $2,500. And so,
wow.
Yeah. And so when we were in the NICU, we didn't have to worry about gas from going back and forth, or food, because we had this abundance of money from our support, to order Uber Eats or, to eat hospital food if that's what we wanted. So, the support this around has been honestly so overwhelming. John, I remember we were in the NICU and I had shown him the meal train page and he just started crying. And he's just like, I cannot believe people, are coming through for us right now. And we both didn't have the capacity to be like, thank you so much to every single person.
Right.
But yeah, it's been the support, I think, is helping the postpartum depression, to be honest.
Yeah, I could see that connection 100% being more helpful.
Yeah.
To prevent that. So, gosh, yeah, that's amazing. Oh, that makes me happy. I'm happy to hear and see that you are doing well. I have just like 2 more questions and then we can kind of wrap it up if you feel like everything that's been wanting to be said has been said. So one thing is, what's one piece of advice you would give to pregnant people as they prepare for labor and birth?
Trust your gut, trust your body. I feel like when you become pregnant, it's an energetic thing, right? You are the only person that's connected to this baby in that moment, right? I mean, the husband helps,
Mm-hmm.
or not the husband, but whoever helps, create this baby with you is connected, but you are connected to that baby. And trust your gut. You know what's best for you. If you feel like something's off, call them. You're not being annoying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 100%. That's great advice. If you could, I know this is going to be super hard. If there is one word you could describe your pregnancy and labor experiences as, what would that word be?
Profound. I mean, I feel like
Profound.
profound, life changing. What's the word? There's so many different words I feel like I could use. But I would say like, yeah, life changing, I guess. I mean, I'm trying to find, there's the one word that I've used to explain it, but transformative. Yeah.
Transformative.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can see that. 100%. Yes. Goodness. Do you, I don't think I prepped you prior for this, but do you have any resources that you want to share with anybody?
Yeah. Yeah. Perinatal Washington is a website that everybody in the hospital had given me. My psychiatrist had given me. It's a great resource. There's like a search bar where you can put in your insurance. You can search for what you're looking for. They have support groups. They have free therapy. They have a search bar where you can put in your insurance and put in the type of therapy that you're looking for. John and I are really interested in EMDR therapy for the trauma, really. And so we had found a few therapists on there. Um, so yeah, Facebook actually is another one that has been really helpful for me. As crazy as it sounds, I feel like it's like Facebook's not as like cool as it used to be or whatever. But I've joined a ton of groups on Facebook for like cerclage mamas, subchorionic hemorrhage, hematoma groups. Even the newest one I've joined is like the hysterectomy group.
Mm-hmm.
And they've been really great resources. I think you have to take some of the stuff with a grain of salt because, not everybody has the same experience and not everybody has like mental health resources. So I think,
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I think that the Perinatal Support of Washington is a fantastic resource. And like you said, there's a lot of support through them. There's a lot of help out there. So
yeah.
yeah. Thank you so much, Anissa. I am so, so honored to be able to hear your story and hold space for this. Thank you so much for sharing. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for having me. And yeah, I feel honored to be able to share my story, and hopefully I can help somebody else in the future or help somebody else process.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I'm like 1,000% sure that you will be helping someone out there. So, for all of those amazing people that are still listening to this episode right now, I want to say thank you. And I say thank you because this was a really tough episode. This episode brought forth a lot of emotions. And so thank you for sticking around. And I want to say directly to Anissa, Anissa, thank you so much. I am so, so, so very honored to be in a space for you to share your story. I am so thankful and lucky, and I feel thankful, lucky, and honored to be part of your healing process. And I really hope that this helps you on your journey of processing these birth experiences and pregnancies. Next week's episode is going to be a little lighter. We actually have the first partner perspective episode. So I'm super excited to announce that my brother in law, Sam, who is my sister Monet's husband, is sharing his perspective of the pregnancy and birth. And I know it's been a lot about Monet. This would be 3 different episodes about her and her family, but I think that it's truly important to be able to share the love. And honestly, I love my family, so I want to talk about them as much as possible because they are also in this experience freshly as parents and pregnancy and birth, all the things. So tune in next week so you don't miss out on the first episode of A Partner's Perspective. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode today. Don't hesitate to share this with your family and friends. If you liked this episode, feel free to leave a review so my podcast can pop up for others and they can see and listen to it as well. If you have a birth story or experience you would want to share on the Birth As We Know It podcast, head over to KionaNessenbaum.com and fill out the guest request form. That is KionaNessenbaum.com. I look forward to connecting with you again soon. Bye for now.